My name is Hannah Wilson, and I am a landscape planner in Christchurch here with Boffa Miskell. But I've also just recently completed my Master of Landscape Architecture thesis, and I'm here to talk to you about it today, and the importance of all of our landscapes. So I thought I'd start with this image. Some of you may or may not be familiar with it, but it was perhaps the most influential image of my thesis. This is Graham Sidney, a famous Central Otago painter, his painting Timeless Land, with a bunch of wind turbines painted on top of it. And it was created during the Lammermoor case, where Meridian Energy wanted to put 176 wind turbines on the Lammermoor ranges. And Graham Sidney, along with poet Brian Turner, along with the rest of the Save Central group, opposed this application. And what was interesting is that ultimately their interpretation of that landscape helped to stop, basically decline the application. So taking a step back, my interest is how people are connected to place through things called associative values, so that connection between people and landscape, and as well as how it's used in landscape assessment. So what interested me about the Lammermoor case was that, first of all, it showed that there could be other outstanding values than just outstanding natural landscapes. And secondly, and therefore I decided to ask the questions, what could happen if associative values were given equal priority to outstanding natural landscapes and landscape assessment? And because the use of artists was so useful in this case, could this be a way of identifying associative values? So I asked, how might artistic expertise be able to aid in the identification of outstanding landscapes? So long story short, I carried out a case study in the Grey District on the West Coast, and I interviewed 4 local artists. One was a photographer, a poet, and 2 painters. And I asked them to take me to the outstanding landscapes to their community. So not outstanding in the context of the RMA, but outstanding in layman's terms. What's important to your community? And so the little dots are where they took me, and you'll notice they're not all in the natural, the dark green. And I thought I'd just show you some of them. So as expected, there's going to be the beautiful West Coast beach and the natural values associated with that. But there are also industrial landscapes, industrial outstanding landscapes. These are the greymouth cranes, the tipheads at the Blacktown and Cobden breakwater. I was also taken to buildings, so really small scale. I was taken to the Blackbull Hilton, or the Dominion as it was known, and the Blackbull Bathhouse. So obviously there were lots of implications for our profession. And I just thought I'd run you through 2 of the key ones in my 10 minutes. So, other outstanding landscapes. So, it was clear from where the artist took me that there are other types of outstanding landscapes. So the first question, going with the theme of disruption, should there be other matters of national importance than just the ones we have today? And perhaps a controversial example could be, should we be including amenity landscapes as a matter of national importance to protect? And the reason why I say that is every artist I spoke to took me to a landscape and then started to discuss the amenity values of that place. The smells, the sounds, the changing nature of the beach, all these things were important to them and made that place outstanding. And then, do we also, carrying on with the theme of disruption, do we also need to think about removing the natural from outstanding natural landscape? Or alternatively, do we add things like outstanding cultural landscapes or outstanding amenity landscapes to incorporate these other values? And the final point for this was, what really struck me as a landscape architect and new landscape planner was the point of reference that we take to a site when we're a landscape architect viewing a place. And I guess the example is shown down the bottom of the screen there. Geoffrey Paparoa-Holman, a New Zealand poet you may have heard of. I interviewed him and he took me to the township of Blackbull. And one of the outstanding landscapes was the Blackbull League field. And above was what's zoned an outstanding natural landscape, the Paparoa Ranges. And I guess what was fascinating about that is the only time he spoke about that landscape was when he discussed where his father went to work and providing context of the town. So I guess that for me was probably one of the most important points, is to check our own biases and what is potentially ordinary to us, the league field, can be outstanding to someone who's local. And then there's implications for methods, so that's Jeffrey in front of the bathhouse there. So currently under the NZILA best practice guidance, we have 3 great associative values: tangata whenua associations, historic heritage, and shared and recognised values. The problem perhaps we come into, myself included when I say this, is that we often associate these things with tangible things, so buildings, structures, sites, but associative values are intangible by definition, which is why they're so difficult to understand. So what can we do to start to improve our identification of associative values? Well, that's a big question. But 2 of the key messages that came out of my thesis was, first of all, picturesque, natural and amenity associations, the sort of blur between what is natural. And what came out of that was most of the artists, apart from Jeffrey, spoke about the enjoyment of their natural landscapes for their own well-being. So taking their kids for a swim at the Brunner Mine, going to Point Elizabeth Beach, as I showed you, these were all important aspects and connections to landscape. And perhaps the most difficult one, especially in the reality of with clients and budgets and things like that, is the identification of memories and stories, their intangible attachments to that landscape. Each artist I spoke to took me to a place that perhaps we would disregard. An example of that was the Black Bull bathhouse, as I just showed you that last photo. But what really struck me was that bench you see with little hooks on it was in the bathhouse, and they didn't want to get rid of them. They repurposed them and put them in the league field. And that just highlighted to me the importance of speaking to people to understand the associative values of a place. So, in summary, what are the take-home messages, whether or not you're a landscape planner? I think this applies to everybody. First of all, the importance of stakeholder engagement. I truly believe we're not experts of associative values until we go about and talking to the people of that place. So in an ideal world, I would ask you to not just talk to your clients, but your stakeholders as well, the people who ultimately will use your design or are affected by your assessment. Secondly, do we need to be looking to other professions to help us identify these values? And what really impressed me about artists, as seen in the Lammermoor decision, is that they were able to distill the values of that place, the associative values, in their chosen mediums, whether it was a painting or a poem or a photograph. And finally, and most importantly, I think this sort of echoes what's been going on in case law and the recent project Landscape Assessment Methodologies workshop, that outstanding does not need to be natural. And I don't believe it's just the special bits that need management, our matters of national importance, but all landscapes, natural and cultural, ordinary and outstanding. Thank you very much.